On March 19th, 2026, permit BLD 2026-0088 was issued by the City of Moses Lake. This is a building permit, specifically a commercial demolition permit. And the work description is simply that, demolition. And what is fascinating to me is that the applicant is the company that is acting as the MEP engineering firm for the Moses Lake site as listed on the Keel Infra.com website. The contractor is Turner Construction, which again is also listed on the keelinfra.com website as the design and build general contractor. And of course, the property owner is oddly enough not Grant Node Development, which is the sort of legal entity through which this particular project seems to have been being developed, but rather some guy's random name with the address being right there at the site. Now, why is this relevant and why is this interesting? It's interesting to me that the permit fee is $230 and the building technology fee is $6.90. I wonder what the building technology fee might be. In any event, I digress. What I think is relevant and interesting about this is the fact that in the past, we have been told that the Moses Lake project would not simply be one big, demolition all at once and then the building of a site, but rather a more phased approach whereby portions of the existing Bitcoin mining infrastructure would be turned off to make way for the construction of parts of this data center. Now, that being the case, if you were to look on Google Maps, right, at the address for the Moses Lake site, you'll see that as it turns out, the little red dot that Google affixes on the map, right, when you plug in that address, happens to be what looks like a bit of an empty warehouse. I'm calling it empty. I don't know that there's any Bitcoin mining taking place in there. If you were to study some of the adjacent buildings, those do look more like overtly like Bitcoin mining data centers. This is a big deal because this permit was issued on March 19th, 2026. It expires. The permit expires on August 25th, 2026. So it would be shocking to me if somehow this permit were to expire absent any work having been done, thus requiring a fresh permit to be applied for. So my intuition tells me that we are likely to see what I would hope, right, is at least some basic demolition work, absent the need for, fish and wildlife permits or, endangered species permits as it relates to this Moses Lake warehouse that's just kind of sitting there. Absent anything like that, I think we might start to see something happening. And if we start to see proverbial, shovels turning, right, shovels are in the ground, so to speak, I think that brings us to a point which aligns with what Jonathan Murr, right, CFO of Keel Infrastructure, mentioned back in January of this year at a institutional conference. He was there with Liam, right, the chief operating officer, and which was echoed more recently by both Ben and Jonathan again during the most recent investor presentation, which is that you are going to likely see the very best deal possible achieved when you reach that point where a shovel is in the ground. So you've de-risked at least, a substantial part of the process. Now, understandably, just because you have everything in place to begin construction doesn't necessarily mean that construction is going to go as planned or that, hey, there aren't going to be issues that arise along the way. But it sounds as if, though, from an economic impact perspective, 90% of the, uplift in potential lease rates really kind of comes into play once you're kind of at that point where like, hey, we're ready to do the construction. We're going to move ahead. hey, we want to go ahead and have a signed tenant, right, for this space before we really commit, right, to sort of the full construction. Although at this point, really, with regard to Moses Lake, Keel Infrastructure has already committed the money. Remember, back in November of 2025, the strategic decision was made to just allocate all the money to basically do the conversion. And then the question was, hey, are we going to just kind of like hang on to this ourselves and go GPU as a service? Or instead, are we going to go for a co-location tenant? And so now we know the goal is a co-location tenant. Now we know on March 19th, 2026, a demolition permit was issued by the city of Moses Lake. So now it seems as if, though, demolition work can begin. Now, yes, it's true that maybe some additional building permits will be needed to build the new building or parts of the new site. But again, I'm hard pressed to believe that we're going to see additional delays that are dramatic in nature. And by dramatic in nature, I'm defining that as like 6 months or more. I'd be shocked. I'd be beside myself if, word comes down, hey guys, Moses Lake, which we thought was like right around the corner, is actually going to be another couple of years away because there's a myriad of permits that just sort of came out of nowhere that we need to comply with. And suddenly, we're on our back feet trying to figure out what needs to be done first. I don't get the impression that's the case. This is a very favorable development. No, we're not going to read about this on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, most people don't even know what Keel Infrastructure is. If I did a survey of 100 people, a lot of people would have heard of Apple, they would have heard of Microsoft, they would have heard of Meta, right? And these are all potential customers of Keel Infrastructure as it relates to the Moses Lake site, right? Remember, the keel of a boat is that unseen part that's underneath. It's just there quietly doing its thing, right? So yeah, we're not going to read about Keel Infrastructure and the fact that they have what appears to be a demolition permit for a relatively small site, right? In a otherwise, 2+ gigawatt pipeline. We're not going to read about that in the Wall Street Journal. So it's up to us to kind of do this kind of digging, to kind of bring this news to the forefront so that we can kind of have a little bit of a sense of what's going on, what kind of progress is being made, and what we have to look forward to in the hopefully not too distant future. Listen, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, okay? The Q1 2026, meaning the first quarter of 2026, right, is over, right? It ended on March 31st. My inclination is to believe that when we have the next investor presentation for Q1 2026, which is probably going to be sometime in May, at least based on the past number of years, typically Q1 of that same year, the investor, presentation is held in May. I'm inclined to believe that we're going to get, God, I don't want to jinx this. I'm inclined to believe that we're going to get an announcement, right, as it relates to Moses Lake. Famous last words, right? Thank you, Stephen. You just jinxed it. Now there's not going to be a deal. It's going to be delayed for another 3 years, and the company is going to just kind of drift along, doing nothing. That's not what we want, right? So anyway, I'm inclined to believe that something has got to be happening here behind the scenes. We already know this. I mean, I actually got on a conference call with the CEO of Hut 8, Asher Canute, right? And I literally asked this. This was like on X. There was a, they were talking about their deal in Louisiana, and I felt like I just got to ask, like, hey, did you see any value? And I'm paraphrasing here. Did you see any value in necessarily waiting longer and longer and longer to try to sign a deal? And his answer in so many words was like, hey, look, we were at that point where we felt it was the right time to act. We had just kind of started making some moves on the ground in terms of like actual construction. So okay, I get that. So it seems as if though now the Moses Lake site for Keel Infrastructure is at that same point, right? I mean, if you have shovels in the ground and you're doing demo work, well, at some point you want to start building something. I don't think the goal is to just demolish what's there and leave nothing but a blank, plate of land, so to speak. So I think we're incredibly, tantalizingly close to something happening at Moses Lake as it relates to a deal being announced. Hey, would there be any strategic value in the company just announcing it on a random Thursday or a random Tuesday, sometime between now and whenever they have the investor presentation? I don't know that would necessarily have the same impact. Bear in mind, there was no real mention of this particular permit during the most recent investor presentation, which took place after March 19th, right? And again, I understand the goal is not to get into the minutia of every single project and where we are with every single permit, but I mean, a demolition permit, that to me sounds like you could get in there tomorrow with a bulldozer and blast that building away. And that's kind of like a big deal. I mean, that's, right? That's kind of like something's happening. Remember how we alluded to at Panther Creek? Hey, if you could just kind of clear a few trees away, and I love trees. I mean, it's so beautiful up there. I mean, I hate to see them go, but again, as I've said before, it's for a good cause. But, you know, the ability to just clear some trees, right, and have there be some action, my gosh, right, that would be phenomenal. Now it appears as though that's going to be happening at Moses Lake. I'm going to be checking out some satellite imagery that I have access to see if I can discern any movement on the ground. And yeah, this is getting kind of interesting, my friends. So if you enjoy this type of investigatory analysis, if you want to call it that, if you enjoy the content that I put out on this channel, please do consider liking and subscribing. And as always, to those of you who have been around for ages and ages, let's stay positive, let's be great, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.